Years ago, when I was in my early 20s, on a sweltering summer day, I attended a Quaker wedding. It was on a rural farm in eastern Tennessee. Now, I made a crucial mistake that afternoon. In my rush to arrive, I forgot to explain to my date how a Quaker wedding differed from other weddings with its strong emphasis on reflection and silence. The wedding took place near the farm's large pond under a covered wooden pavilion, and on the pond, ducks and swans tussled on the water in the growing heat. As the temperature and humidity soared, the wedding guest arrived wearing formal wedding attire, more suited for a cooler venue. The earth steamed, the flowers drooped, and the wedding guest wilted. Moments after we sat down in the hot shade, the service started. A Quaker wedding takes place during a Quaker meeting. The service begins in the silence with the bride and groom escorting one another down the aisle to a pair of chairs in the front of the gathering, where they sit until they're ready to announce their intention to be married. My friends glided down the narrow aisle, sat down briefly, and stood to declare their intention to marry, returned to their seats. And then the elder of that Quaker meeting stood up and explained to those gathered that we would be silent together as we waited for the Spirit, the divine presence, to move us to speak about marriage, love, or the couple. After the instructions, the elder recited a gorgeous poem on the beauty of love, seemingly out of nowhere, and sat down. The ducks splashed in the pond while we waited for the Spirit to move us. As a river of sweat flowed down my back, family members, friends, and guests stood up to testify to the couple's love. They expressed their hopes for them. And while I wanted to celebrate my friends, I also hoped the wedding would be brief on such a hot day. Spirit, keep it tight, keep it quick. As the guests and family shared beautiful stories and wisdom, I kept on hoping that the Spirit would help bring words to me. In fact, I found that as more and more people shared, I spent more and more time thinking about what I was going to say, crafting it, trying to change it, to make it just right. But by doing so, I had stopped listening. My attention turned away from the people speaking to the moment and turned toward the words I was forming in my head. And finally, without help from the Spirit, I stood and shared a story about my friends. And then I sat down, and the community returned to silence. And then I noticed that my date was getting quite agitated. He was shifting in his chair. He was pulling at his tie. He was wiping sweat from his brow. Without explanation of how a Quaker wedding works, my date began to believe that the wedding could not end until he spoke. And so in the growing silence, he felt that everyone was waiting for him to do his part. Finally, he bolted out of his chair, babbled some heartfelt nonsense in a hopeful bid to end the wedding. But as he sat down, the silence continued. A few more people spoke, and the wedding finally ended. We moved to celebrate. I learned 3 important lessons that day. First, we often fail to listen to other people and ourselves, because we're so busily crafting our reply in a conversation. I was fortunate this happened right before I was going into ministry. How often that our minds are already thinking of the next answer, the response, how we're going to say the perfect thing, or maybe an argument and push back. Looking back on my friend's Quaker wedding, I realized that my date and I had essentially missed most of the wedding. We were so worried about what we were going to say that we had stopped listening to everything. Not only the words that were being spoken, but all of the sounds and even the sights around us. This often happens when we multitask, when we're looking at our phone, glancing at our watch. We allow our minds to flood with that next thing to do on our list. Second, I also began to learn that listening is a multi-sensory activity. It involves all of our senses, and in our discomfort in the silent portions of the wedding, we missed the sounds of nature that surrounded us, the ducks moving on the water, the rustling of clothes, how the heat that afternoon changed the air around us. We stopped listening to ourselves, the sounds of our own breaths. As scholar Evanly Gleany notes, sound is basically a specialized form of touch. Sound is a specialized form of touch. Sound is simply vibrating air, which the ear picks up and converts to electrical signals, which are then interpreted by the brain. The sense of hearing is not the only sense that can do this. Touch can do this as well. So if you're standing by the road and a large truck goes by, do you hear or do you feel the vibration? Even on a Sunday morning, do you hear or do you feel the music? And third, we learned from that Quaker wedding, we often think about the way to become a better listener is to stop talking, to shut up, to simply be quiet. But with these imperatives, we forget to turn to listening. We forget to embrace silence. A silence that is not the absence of sound, either an empty room or the help with noise-canceling earbuds or headphones. Rather, silence is a space that's not filled with noise, but often includes the sounds of nature and humanity. Silence is holding space for gathering our thoughts and ourselves, and also for letting go of the thoughts that are so intrusive and overwhelming. Silence is rest, but it's not empty or defined by complete absence. After all, the ancient mystics of Christianity and other religious traditions, those who went out into the Egyptian desert and other deserts in this world to seek the divine, did not find silence in the desert. Rather, the ancient desert fathers and mothers found the sounds of nature, the wind on the sand and rock, the movement of animals, the hissing of snakes, the scuttle of a lizard, the flap of a wing, and at times, the movement of water. As Kim Haynes Edson in her fabulous book, The Sonorous Desert, What Deep Listening Taught Early Christian Monks and What It Can Teach Us, she argues, for ancient Christian mystics, the desert only seems deserted. It only seems silent. It only seems to be a place for solitude. The parched landscape reveals, perhaps surprisingly, the fullness of life. The apparent emptiness helps us embrace community. The bareness cultivates a rich experience. Finding moments to hold space in our own lives, to find silence, to be apart, is a way to help us embrace community, as long as we remember the two parts. The pandemic moved us more to the solitude and silence side, and many of us are still finding a way to get back that connection, that embrace to community. We need both to thrive. Silence also helps us cultivate gratitude for community. And yet in these tumultuous times, listening is becoming increasingly difficult. Yet it can be one of the tools that can ease our anxiety. I certainly have many friends who say that there are certain news broadcasts that they cannot listen to right now, that it feels like an assault to them, to their very being. But that doesn't mean we should stop listening to those who are close to us, to our friends, our family, to the stranger that we need and hope to connect with. Yes, listening can be a tool that can ease anxiety, to increase well-being, to help us build relationships. Listening and its companion silence are the lifelines for these times, a way to connect deeply with others and ourselves. Because how often do we forget to listen to ourselves? When I reflect on listening and silence, I'm often reminded of the ancient story of a prophet named Elijah, who was filled with despair. He felt disconnected to the holy, to the divine. But then Elijah was told to go to a mountain, for the divine would be passing by. He was told to stand on the mountain, and that's where he would witness this miraculous moment. And so Elijah went to the mountain, and he waited. And suddenly there was a great and strong wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks before the divine. But the divine was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the divine was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the divine was not in the fire. And in that moment, afterwards, after the fire, after the earthquake, after the great wind, there was the sound, the sheer sound of silence. Elijah experiences the holy, the sheer sound of silence. But in other translations of this text, the Hebrew is translated as a still small voice, a still small voice of calm, or the sound of gentle silence. God, the divine, the holy, is not in the dramatic display, the noise of the wind, the power of the earthquake, the fierce fire. The divine, the holy, the wisdom is in the silence. Or perhaps, just perhaps, Elijah listened, and it was there all along. Janice Dunn, in a recent article in the Happiness series for the New York Times, and maybe you saw it was quite recent, shared the power of listening to family and friends, and that it's been proven, scientists have been able to chart that when we talk with our loved ones and we feel listened to, and when we listen to our loved ones and friends, it has a major impact on our happiness, has a major impact on our overall well-being. But sometimes people resist because they fear it may take too much time, or I'll do that another day and another day and another time, pushing it off as if time is endless. Dunn and others suggest you should ask your friend, and they've figured this out, the timing to be enough that you feel fulfilled when you speak and when you're listening, and vice versa, that the right amount of time to get that bare minimum is 8 minutes. 8 minutes. 8 minutes. And so Dunn and others suggest you have to ask a friend, instead of putting off, say, can we have an 8-minute conversation on the phone this week or in person? 8 minutes. She even gives a script. I read in the New York Times this week, we should have an 8-minute conversation to make us more happy. 8 minutes. In the article, Claudia Glasser-Musin, a psychotherapist in New York City, tells us that hearing the sound of a loved one's voice is emotionally regulating. So why do we avoid it? Well, why do we not listen? Why do we skip over the chance to listen to others and be fully present? Why do we not listen to ourselves? That dance of listening and silence and listening is a wellspring for us in these challenging times. It offers so much possibility if we only give it a chance. Years ago, a friend of mine shared his wife's diagnosis of cancer and how he struggled in that moment, and how he realized that listening was the last thing he was willing to do. As he waited for the test results and more tests to confirm their worst fears, breast cancer, Tim, who was a minister, spoke of the hours he spent in prayer and meditation. He prayed as he had never prayed before. He spoke the words, he made the motions, he yelled out. He cried, he wept, he mumbled. All the ways he knew to approach heartbreak like this, he called to his side, but nothing happened. Finally, after an exhausting every avenue he knew of, Tim fell silent. He sat in silence. He dwelled there for quite a while, and he began to really listen. And at first, he began to hear the noises of the world around him. He heard his breath. He heard his heartbeat. And he heard something else. He heard, he says, peace. He heard love. He heard a sense of well-being, a sense that he felt so strongly that it did not promise a cure for his wife. It was a deeper understanding of life and death and illness and their role as a family and partners together to face whatever they had coming in the months ahead. Tim learned to listen to himself once again, and then he learned to listen to his wife and his children and his friends as he went through those difficult moments. Silence and listening. Only an 8-minute conversation to start. What gift can you give to yourself, to your friends, to your loved ones this week, next week, and in the months to come, in a world that is full of so much noise? But if you don't believe me, perhaps reflect on this. Kathleen Norris, the author and poet, in her book Amazing Grace, talks about some of the extraordinary ideas that emerged when she used to invite children to reflect on the power of silence. Over the years, Norris frequently visited schools to help children explore the topic of poetry. In one exercise, she invites the children to concentrate on noise and silence. Norris describes the exercise to the children like this. The rules for noise were simple. When I raise my hand, I told them, you make all the noise you can while sitting at your desk using your mouth, hands, and feet. The kids' eyes would grow wide. And the teachers as well. So she would then add the important part where when she would lower her hand, they would have to stop making the noise. Let's try that, actually. Let's make some noise together. When I raise my hand, you will make all the noise you can while sitting in your pews, using your mouth, hands, and feet. And then when I lower my hands, you will stop making the noise. All right, so here's my hand up here. The rush. So when children were asked in her classroom to describe noise after doing this exercise, they would use cliches. They would talk about elephants and other ways to talk about noise. But when she asked them to imagine silence, to just breathe normally and quietly, to make no noise at all, just as all of you are, she found that this exercise was liberating for their creativity. She would ask the children to write about silence, and they used words of strength and images full of imagination. One boy, she writes, came up with the image of strength as being as slow and silent as a tree. Another wrote that silence is me waiting to wake up. Silence is me waiting to wake up. Silence is a tree spreading its branches to the sun. Another child wrote, silence is spiders spinning their webs. It's like a silkworm making its silk. And then the child added, Lord, help me know when to be silent. And lastly, a little girl from a small town in a very small town far away wrote Norris's favorite and perhaps mine. This little girl, a third grader, I should say, wrote, silence reminds me to take my soul with me wherever I go. Silence reminds me to take my soul with me wherever I go. Silence teaches us to listen to nature, to ourselves. It teaches us how to be present so when we are listening to nature but to one another, we can really hear. We can really be with one another. Kim Haynes-Eitzen says that silence and listening joins us not only with the present, but connects us with the past. Those who heard and watched, feared and hoped, those whose voices still speak across time and place, that help us thrive in this moment. If we only pause to listen, if we only pause to listen deeply, here and now, to the earth and to one another. Blessed be, and amen.